When they pushed me to the edge, I learned to fly back at them. I walked into that building for nearly half a century. 47 years, to be exact. I knew every sound it made, the elevator's soft chime on the 12th floor, the way polished marble echoed footsteps in the morning silence, even the particular squeak of the conference room door when someone pushed it too quickly. I understood the rhythm of that place better than I understood my own heartbeat. So when Helen from HR called me in that Tuesday morning, I didn't panic. I figured it was another policy update, maybe a retirement party discussion. Nothing prepared me for what actually waited behind that door. The conference room felt colder than usual. 2 people from legal sat motionless at the far end of the table, their expressions carefully blank. A security guard stood near the door, hands clasped in front of him like he was guarding something precious. No one offered me a chair right away. No one offered water. The air itself felt rehearsed. Helen spoke first, her voice steady and mechanical. "Concerns," she said. "Recent observations." Then came the phrase that made my stomach drop. "Your best interests." They were forcing me into retirement. My pension would be suspended pending some vague review. Questions were raised about my mental clarity, my ability to perform duties I'd been performing since before most of them were born. I understood immediately. This wasn't a conversation. This was an execution dressed up as concern. When security walked me past cubicles filled with people young enough to be my grandchildren, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper and quieter. Something worse. They hadn't just pushed me aside. They'd pushed me to the edge of irrelevance, hoping I'd simply disappear into the silence that swallows forgotten men. My entire professional life fit into a single cardboard box. 3 industry awards that once filled me with pride now felt like cheap plastic. A framed photograph of myself at 40, standing straighter than my spine would ever allow again, shaking hands with the company founder. Notebooks filled with ideas I'd scribbled during late nights when the company still felt like something I belonged to, not something that merely tolerated my presence. A coffee mug Ava gave me when she was 7, painted with crooked letters that spelled, "Best Grandpa." That hurt the most to pack. Outside, Ironcliff City moved without pause. Cars honked through intersections. People laughed on sidewalks, carrying bags and checking phones. Glass towers reflected clouds as if nothing catastrophic had just occurred. The world didn't care that I'd been erased. Ava waited across the street, leaning against her car. She didn't rush toward me with questions or sympathy. She simply walked over, took the box from my trembling hands, and fell into step beside me. We didn't speak during the drive. What was there to say? My granddaughter understood silence better than most people understood words. That night, I sat alone in the dark living room, replaying every moment, every careful word they'd chosen, every expression that revealed nothing. The way security had positioned himself between me and my desk, as if I might become violent or steal something. I didn't feel broken. Broken things can be repaired. I felt discarded. And discarded things simply disappear. The days after stretched into a strange, hollow quiet. No one called. Not Helen with clarifications. Not former colleagues checking in. Not even the automated system reminding me about benefits enrollment. My work email bounced back messages marked, "User not found." My name vanished from the company directory as if 47 years had been a clerical error, quietly corrected. I checked my phone compulsively at first, certain someone would reach out. Surely Marcus from accounting would call. We'd had lunch every Thursday for 6 years. Or Patricia, who always asked about Ava and remembered my birthday. But phones stayed silent. Messages never came. The world I'd inhabited every weekday for nearly 5 decades had sealed itself shut behind me, leaving no crack for me to peer through. That realization hurt worse than the meeting itself. The humiliation I could have processed. Being escorted out stung, but I'd witnessed others endure it. This was different. This was erasure. They weren't just removing me from the building. They were removing me from memory. I started understanding then. Humiliation wasn't their goal. Silence was. Silence is where people disappear permanently, where careers end not with a bang, but with a whisper no one bothers to hear. They were counting on me to fade quietly, to accept invisibility as the natural conclusion of growing old in a world that worships youth. But something inside me refused. Some stubborn part that remembered being sharp, being necessary, being heard. That part started whispering back, telling me this wasn't over. I began writing on the 4th day. Not emotionally. I wasn't interested in venting feelings into a journal that no one would read. I wrote methodically, like the engineer I'd been trained to be. Dates first, then meetings. Reports I'd authored that were later altered without my knowledge or consent. Decisions I'd argued against vocally, only to be overruled by people who'd been with the company less than a decade. Names of colleagues who'd started avoiding me in the final months, their eyes sliding past mine in hallways. My memory, which they'd questioned so confidently, proved remarkably sharp. Details surfaced with clarity that surprised even me. I remembered the exact date when my safety recommendations were ignored. I remembered who signed off on the decision. I remembered the email chain where I'd predicted the exact problems that later materialized, and I remembered how those emails mysteriously disappeared from the shared server. The writing took 3 weeks. Ava brought groceries and sat with me some evenings, reading while I worked. She never asked what I was doing. She trusted me to tell her when I was ready. The truth assembled itself on paper, undeniable and precise. They hadn't removed me because I'd become incompetent. They'd removed me because I remembered too much. I'd witnessed decisions that looked questionable in hindsight. I'd raised objections that were now proving correct. I'd become a liability, not because I was failing, but because I was a living record of their failures. As patterns emerged from my notes, a larger picture took shape. There was the environmental audit scheduled for last April. I'd prepared documentation, flagged concerns, requested additional time for thorough review. The audit was rushed through in 3 days instead of the standard 3 weeks. My section, the one detailing chemical storage violations, was removed from the final report entirely. I'd protested. I was told the issues were being handled internally. Then there was the risk assessment for the new manufacturing process. I'd calculated failure rates, projected costs of inadequate safety measures. My numbers were replaced with more optimistic figures from a consultant who'd never set foot in our facilities. When I questioned the changes in a department meeting, I was told I was resisting innovation. The timeline became clear. 6 months of systematic marginalization. My access to certain files was restricted without explanation. Meetings I'd attended for years suddenly became leadership only. My recommendations were acknowledged politely, then ignored completely. The edge they'd pushed me toward wasn't personal. It was strategic. I'd become an obstacle to plans I hadn't fully understood while I was inside them. Obstacles get removed quietly, efficiently, before they can cause real problems. For the first time since that conference room, I stopped asking why this happened to me. Instead, I started asking what it meant, not just for me, but for everyone still working in that building, trusting the same system that had discarded me without hesitation. I made a choice that surprised even me. I let them win. Publicly, anyway. When a former colleague ran into me at the grocery store and asked what happened, I smiled vaguely and mentioned early retirement, my health, spending time with family. I didn't correct his assumption that I'd chosen to leave. When Ava's friends asked why I wasn't working anymore, I told them I was enjoying my free time. I let the story they'd crafted settle over me like dust over furniture in an abandoned house. Invisibility gave me something unexpected. Freedom. While everyone believed I'd quietly accepted my fate, I was doing something else entirely. I was learning. I reread every contract I'd signed over 47 years. I studied company policies I'd never questioned. I reviewed correspondence I'd filed away and forgotten. I requested public records available to any citizen. The machine revealed itself when you stopped being inside it. From within, everything seemed necessary, justified, normal. From outside, patterns of negligence and corner-cutting became obvious. Safety shortcuts that saved money but risked lives. Environmental violations papered over with misleading reports. Workers' complaints buried in bureaucracy until people gave up fighting. I wasn't special. I was simply old enough to remember when things were done differently, and stubborn enough to believe that mattered. The edge they'd pushed me toward was sharpening into something else, not a place to fall from, but a place to stand. Ava wanted me to go public immediately. Call reporters. Contact regulators. Expose everything I'd found. Her anger on my behalf was fierce and genuine. She'd seen what those months of marginalization had done to me. She wanted justice, swift and visible. We argued about it one evening in my kitchen, her voice rising with frustration while I stayed quiet. "They can't just do this to you," she insisted, her hands gripping the table edge. "You have documentation. You have proof. Make them answer for it." I let her finish. Then I shook my head, not in disagreement, but in something more complex. "This isn't about revenge," I said quietly. "It's about dignity." She stared at me, not understanding. "Revenge would feel good momentarily," I explained. "Watching them scramble, defend, deflect. Yes, that would satisfy something. But it wouldn't give me back what I'd lost. It wouldn't restore the years they'd taken. It wouldn't return the version of myself that existed before I needed their permission to matter. I wanted something different. I wanted to reclaim myself, the part of me that had existed before that company, that would exist after it, that didn't require their validation or acknowledgement to be real. I wanted to prove, mostly to myself, that being pushed to an edge didn't mean falling. Sometimes it meant learning the edge was never real to begin with. That decision changed everything. It transformed my documentation from ammunition into something else, evidence that I'd existed, that I'd been right, that I'd mattered regardless of whether they admitted it. 6 months after they escorted me out, I walked back into that building. Not in a suit this time. Just simple clothes, comfortable shoes, the folder containing everything I'd compiled tucked under my arm. No announcement. No warning. Just presence. I arrived at 9 in the morning when I knew they'd all be there. Security saw me coming through the glass doors. I watched recognition and confusion flicker across the young guard's face. He'd been there that day, had walked me out with his hand hovering near my elbow like I might collapse or cause a scene. Now he hesitated, unsure. His hand moved toward his radio, then stopped. I wasn't trespassing. I had visitor rights like anyone else. He wasn't sure what to do with a ghost who refused to stay dead. I walked past him to the elevators, pressed the button for the 12th floor, and rode up in silence. The building remembered me, even if the people inside had tried to forget. The elevator chimed exactly as it always had. The conference room door still squeaked. Helen was there in the hallway. She froze when she saw me, her coffee cup suspended halfway to her mouth. I nodded politely and walked past her into the same conference room where this had begun. I sat down in the same chair. I placed my folder carefully on the polished table. Then I waited. They came within minutes. Helen, someone from legal, a senior director whose name I'd never learned. They entered cautiously, as if I might detonate. My voice, when I spoke, was perfectly calm. You miscalculated. Nothing more. Just those two words, hanging in the air between us. I didn't explain immediately. I let them sit with the uncertainty while I arranged papers from my folder. Let them wonder what I knew, what I wanted, what I was capable of doing. The power dynamic had shifted, and they felt it. The old man they dismissed as a forgettable inconvenience had walked back in with purpose, and they had no script for this scenario. Finally, I slid the first document across the table. The environmental audit from April, comparing the version I'd written with the version they'd submitted to regulators. Highlighted sections showed where my warnings had been deleted, replaced with sanitized language that obscured actual risks. I watched their eyes move across the pages, watched expressions shift from confusion to recognition to something approaching fear. I didn't accuse. I didn't need to. Understanding was doing the work for me. I simply placed document after document on the table. The risk assessment with my calculations versus the consultant's optimistic fantasies. Email chains I'd archived that had mysteriously vanished from company servers. Meeting minutes showing my objections that were later edited out of the official record. For 40 minutes, I sat while they read. I watched them realize what I'd known for months. They'd underestimated me. They'd assumed age meant weakness, confusion, irrelevance. They'd assumed I'd disappear quietly into retirement, taking my inconvenient memories with me. They'd pushed me away because I remembered too much, never considering that pushing someone away might give them time to remember everything. For the first time since that initial meeting, I felt centered. Not victorious. Not superior. Simply whole. I existed in that room not as someone begging for acknowledgement, but as someone who no longer needed it from them. They offered settlements. Generous ones. Numbers with enough zeros to tempt anyone into silence. Full pension restoration, immediate payment of all benefits, additional compensation for what they delicately called misunderstandings. They spoke carefully about confidentiality agreements, mutual non-disclosure, moving forward positively. A lawyer who'd been summoned mid-meeting explained the terms in practiced language designed to make capitulation sound like wisdom. I'd sign papers promising never to discuss what happened. They'd sign papers promising to pay me handsomely for that silence. Everyone would walk away satisfied, he suggested, as if satisfaction was something money could purchase from someone they'd tried to erase. Once, those numbers would have meant everything. When I was younger, when I had a mortgage and college tuition looming and the weight of providing for others, I would have calculated what that money could do. But I was 80 years old. My house was paid off. Ava was established in her career. I didn't need financial security. I needed something they couldn't quantify in a settlement offer. I listened without interrupting. Let them finish their pitch, outlining terms and timelines and conditions. When silence finally settled over the room, I carefully gathered my documents back into the folder. I didn't reject them harshly. I didn't lecture about morality or responsibility or the things they should have done differently. I simply stood up, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked toward the door. The edge they'd pushed me toward no longer existed beneath my feet. I'd learned to fly. I left that building for what I knew would be the last time. No security escort now. No eyes following my exit with pity or judgment. I walked through the lobby like any visitor whose business had concluded, pushed through glass doors into afternoon sunshine, and felt something lift from my shoulders that had been weighing me down for months. Outside, Ironcliff City looked different. Not hostile anymore. Not indifferent. Just irrelevant. The glass towers still reflected clouds. Traffic still moved through intersections. People still hurried along sidewalks toward destinations that mattered intensely to them and not at all to me. The world hadn't changed. I had. For 47 years, my identity had been shaped by that building and what happened inside it. My sense of worth had been constructed from titles and responsibilities, and being needed by an organization that I'd believed needed me. I'd measured myself against their standards, sought their approval, defined success by their metrics. Now it had no claim on me whatsoever. That realization felt like flight, not the desperate flapping of someone trying to avoid falling, but the soaring freedom of someone who discovered that the ground was never as far down as they'd been taught to fear. They'd pushed me to an edge, yes. But the edge was an illusion. Beyond it wasn't emptiness. Beyond it was simply everything else. I called Ava from my car. "It's finished," I told her. "Let's have dinner tonight. Somewhere nice. My treat." She asked if I'd exposed them, made them pay, gotten justice. I thought about that. "I got something better," I said. "I got myself back. I live quietly now in a way I never did before. Mornings arrive without alarms jerking me into consciousness. I drink coffee on my porch and watch sunlight move across my small garden. Days pass without requiring justification or productivity metrics. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I work on projects that interest me, teaching myself carpentry, volunteering at the community center, helping Ava with renovations on her house. The company still exists, still occupies that glass tower downtown. The people who pushed me out still work there, still attend meetings and file reports and tell themselves they're doing important work. They remember me now in a way they didn't want to, not as the doddering old man they discarded, but as the one who walked back in and refused to accept their version of who I was supposed to be. I didn't destroy them. I didn't seek revenge or exposure or justice in the way Ava originally wanted. The documents I compiled sit in a safe deposit box, organized and dated, existing as proof of what happened even if no one else ever reads them. That's enough. They're not ammunition. They're simply a record that I existed, that I was right, that I mattered. They pushed me to the edge of the life they defined for me, the life where my value was determined by their needs, where my worth was measured by their standards, where my existence was valid only within boundaries they'd established. And I stepped beyond it. Not in anger, though I'd been angry. Not in revenge, though I'd wanted it. In freedom. That's what flying means. Not rising above them to prove superiority. Just rising above the need for them to define me at all. Just discovering that the edge was always a choice, not a destination. Just learning that being pushed can teach you something they never intended, that you had wings all along,